Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and today we are joined by a guest to talk about so many things we've never talked about in this podcast history, some really big and complex things that affect all of our businesses, whether we realize it or not, especially with the AI revolution upon us. So we've got an incredible guest who's at the cutting edge of so many aspects of technology to break down all this stuff for us. He's super talented. He's awesome at what he does. So I want to tell you about today's guest. His name is Duan Uys. To read you a little bit about his bio, for sure he's going to have to fill in some gaps because this guy has had an incredible professional career as well as now an entrepreneurial career. He's one of us. So let me tell you about Duan Uys. He's the CEO and founder of Qubix Data Solutions with a strong background in data analysis and software development. Duan embarked on his data journey during his postgraduate career where he had the opportunity to work with satellite data. I said we're going to be talking about complex stuff. This guy's career only works inside complex stuff. He then transitioned into the oil and gas industry as an analyst, automating various aspects of his job. He's built software to predict estimated revenues and earnings from sales. He went on to establish the research and development department at his previous company and gained valuable experience in embedded technologies, writing firmware, and collaborating with electronic engineers. During COVID, Duan joined a forward-thinking law firm with tech aspirations and played a pivotal role in developing a powerful SaaS product, architecting their entire back end. So there's all those experiences that he's taken now into his own company, Qubix Data Solutions, which provides high-quality, scalable data solutions to the market. This guy is fascinated and has an interest in emerging technologies, AI tools, quantum computing, how they can fit into his own tech stack. He also marries all of this stuff with an understanding of the actual business applications of this sort of technology. So we're in for a treat today. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Duan Uys. Duan, what is up, man? Welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Hi, Brian. Good to meet you.
Heck yeah. As you heard in the bio, and I'm very transparent about it, I don't even know where to start with you today because you have done some incredible things. So the first place we'll start is fill in the gaps for listeners. Take us beyond the bio. Who is Duan? How the heck did you end up here?
Oh, man. Well, yeah. So, I've always been just a really curious person. I guess, I'd love to get to talk a little bit more about this as we go further, right? But to kind of just to add to the bio itself, right? I've been in the software realm for more than a decade now. It all started, and I can start with that too. But it all started really when I was just really during college itself, I don't know, just the natural curiosity in me was really just spilling out a little later in my young adult life. I wouldn't say like in I was never an A student or, an all-star student in school. High school, I was your typical, well, not your typical, I was your B and C student focusing mainly on the C grade stuff, right? So, I can't say I was just an all-star even in school and whatever, but something just happened growing up a little bit during college where my curiosity for the natural world just started to spark. And I actually attributed to my one physics teacher. I can't pronounce her name. She was Russian, who was teaching physics 101 at the time. Probably for most of the listeners here or whoever, when you took calculus and physics in school, and that's a whole other podcast, I suppose we can talk into, but the content there was just so terribly delivered. Math is hated by a lot of people because of its complexity. It's how it's being taught today. Anyways, but this one teacher really explained it in a way that was applicable to the natural world. Like, how can we use these complex ideas in ways that's actually useful to us? And that triggered something in my mind. I don't know what it was, but I just remember it so clear as day because that was the day that I just became. I was always curious, but this was like 20-fold, right? I started looking at things so differently and asking why. Why does it work that way? I want to pull it apart and understand what makes it tick. And anyway, so I retaught myself physics and calculus during my latter part of my college career. And that's how I got into my postgraduate, was working with satellite imagery. I was actually, I got my postgraduate degree in geophysics, right, we worked specifically with satellites, where I tried to use technology called INSAR. It's an acronym or a shorthand version for interferometric synthetic aperture radar. It's a long-winded way of just saying, hey, let's take satellite imagery, let's beam it onto the land, and then we come back a year or two later and we do the exact same thing. And if there's any sort of ground movement, we would pick that up in comparing the two images. And I tried to use that technology to see if we could predict ground movement, like landslides, and especially at construction site or mining site, where they dig into the earth, right? Which it's a very hazardous thing. So, anyways, so that naturally progressed me into the software world, because, as you can imagine, being in a postgraduate or just being in college in general, right? You don't have funding, right? And all the tools that were out on the market was for enterprise grade, with the enterprise grade, and they were made for commercial, organizations. So they were very, very expensive. And obviously, as a little, department, we don't have that kind of funding. So I was like, let me just do it myself. That was kind of the thought process. And before that, I had a little bit of programming experience, not a lot. But anyway, so I went into that, and I ended up creating all of the software to essentially do the analysis and analyzing the satellite imagery data, and just really helping get to that thesis, really, at the end of the day of can we use the technology. The conclusion to that, just for if you're curious, is no, we can't, because we don't have enough satellite data available at that time, which was years ago. But that could be different today. So. Anyway, so that's where the software portion came up, and then really when I started programming, that's where that curiosity part of me, I'm always just curious of how things work. I started pulling everything apart, right? One huge philosophy for me, anyways, is that the more I'm curious about something, an aspect, technology, philosophy, how people work, how the mind hives, anything that's out there in the world, you start picking it apart, and you start really unwrapping. Or what I've experienced, anecdotally, what I've experienced is that you just start, as you dig into the complexities of things, it starts unraveling, and then complex ideas, thoughts, technology is not so complex as we make it out to be from a high level standpoint. And and if you really go into programming, we always kind of just throw this out there, or you may or may not know this, right? But hey, programmings are just a bunch of zeros and ones, right? And we kind of just say that offhand without really putting too much thought in it. But that really is the case. I mean, computers are just zeros and ones. It's remarkable what we can do with just zeros and ones, right? I mean, look at your phone today. Look at what we can do with satellites, GPS, self-driving cars. As I'm sure everyone here, or even you, and has heard of this ChatGPT thing that's completely revolutionized the way we are efficient and optimal at the beginning of this year, right? It really just comes down to zeros and ones. And I'm not trying to also dissuade the complexity of things. There are still things that are complex, but it's if you break it out into smaller segments, you realize that they're the building blocks of the fundamentals. And I know I'm kind of speaking, without getting into intrinsic examples, I suppose, right? But I'm trying not to. Anyway, so it's just really just stripping away that complexity of it. And that's what I really saw when I started really getting into software, was no matter if you're an analyst or building data warehouses or building complex AI models, right? It's all built off of the basic building blocks, those blocks are built off of basic building blocks that's a little bit higher in abstract form. And then you just keep on climbing the ladder, right, until you get to a product that we use today. So that's really what it is, right? Going from college into the oil and gas, prior to postgraduate, I was actually in the oil and gas as an intern, and that's actually as an intern for a oil exploration company. And that was actually the first time I actually had any sort of experience with programming. Is just a short little story because I think it's pretty cool. But they were using a product at the time called AutoCAD, which is mainly used for like modeling and stuff. But they were using that tool at the time to point out where their interest in wells are, because they actually invested in their own drillings and their own wells that they drilled. So they had this big old map of everything of where their wells were in a geographic location. And they're doing this on AutoCAD. But anyways, every day we would get summary sheets from the drillers to show the exact location of the drill bit. So as you're drilling in the hole, it was horizontal drilling. So as you drill in the hole and you go out here, you get GPS coordinates of where that drill bit was at a certain point in time. And I mean, I'm talking like these things is like 5 pages long. It's like thousands of data points. And obviously for me to show it to my superiors at the time of where they are in the drilling, I mean, you can't physically do 1,000 data points and plot it on a map, right? That would take you weeks. So I would just kind of extrapolate a little bit of it and just take 2 or 3 data points and let it go. But I looked at it and I was like, man, that looks ugly. I mean, it's just like these lines, and it just doesn't look ugly. And this is taking way too long, and I'm just not a big fan of it. So I ended up figuring out AutoCAD uses an internal programming. At least it did then. I haven't even worked with AutoCAD in like more than a decade, but it was called AutoLisp at the time. And anyway, so I learned enough of it to essentially just copy and paste the XYZ coordinates and let the program draw out all those 2,000-3,000 points. So you can now actually see a very, very high definition bird's eye view of where the drill was. And I did that for all the 150 wells that they had. And so that was the very first experience. Postgraduate to the geophysics, and then I went back to the oil and gas industry as an analyst and built some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I love that overview for so many reasons, Duan. The first thing that I want to call out that really stands out to me about that story is the fact that you talked about that physics teacher that really showed you, hey, here's the real world applications of it. I totally resonate with that story. I hated calculus, but by college, when I got into economics and I realized, wait, you can use calculus in econometrics and it applies to the real world, then it sparked my fascination. And then the second part that I really want to call out that I love about your overview of what led you here is it's really evident to me as someone who's looking at your work from the outside in, and especially researching ahead of today's session, is I really realized I think one of Duan's superpowers is finding that interconnectedness between all of these different things. We are talking, I mean, a lot of the things you just gave us an overview of, which I could listen to you talk about for days, is very complex things, but you do break it down and say, hey, actually, all these complex things, I think of AutoCAD as like, people use that for 3D printing, and you're talking about using it for huge enterprise level solutions. And so I think it's fascinating to hear that, which leads me to one area that I know listeners are going to be super curious to hear your take on is, of course, data. It's a big word. You obviously come at it with your engineering hat on, but it's something I would argue that us as entrepreneurs, we don't fully understand. We always say, use your data, whether it's customer data, sales data, whatever it is. We talk about data as this super, kind of like you said, ones and zeros. We throw it out there offhanded without actually getting to the root of it of, hey, what actually does this mean? How can we start using this to our advantage? You love data. Duan, where do we start when it comes to having the data conversation for businesses, for entrepreneurs who don't understand, okay, we use this D word, but what do we do with it?
Of course. Yeah. So data, yes, you're right. Data is definitely one of my favorite topics. I love data for one big reason. It is unbiased. With a little asterisk on that I want to talk about in a little bit. But ultimately, data is a very, very broad word, to your point, right? You get sales data, you get customer data, you have data from IoT applications, you have data all over the place. I mean, a Tesla car generates petabytes of data within like a couple minutes or something. Don't quote me on that. I know it's a lot of data in a very short amount of time. And the point is, what do we do with it? What can you do with that? Well, to be honest, and that's what I like about data is because it's unbiased. Now, how we interpret that data, that's where the human bias comes in. But in its raw natural state, if you do the experiment right, or you collect the data from your sources and you begin analyzing it, you start gaining insight into the real world, right? And in the past, when data was not, I mean, data was always around. It's always been in the academia world, but in the enterprise world, most business decisions that we made was done by leadership, and they were done by the gut feeling, right? Oh, I've been in this industry for X many years. This is how I know it's going to work. And for the most part, I'm not also shooting that down. That that wisdom that comes from being in a certain industry for so long definitely comes into play. But now data should, in my opinion, right, with the amount of data and the technology and tools that we have available to us, is now a tool that we can use to augment our decisions, right? The human brain is capable of doing so many amazing and wonderful things, but it's one thing that it's really bad at doing. One thing that it's bad at doing is absorbing everything and making sense of everything. We're already, a lot of that is subconsciously taken, like we're breathing, we're walking, we're doing things that we're not even thinking of, but that's taking processing power, right? We're able to remember and being able to extrapolate and, forgetting the word, but we're able to generalize. That's the word I'm looking for. We're able to generalize, right? But things that computers are great at doing in combination with data is analyze billions and billions and billions of data points really, really fast and get down to the crux of it and be able to show you insights and trends that you may not, as a person or even a team of people, would be capable of knowing without using data as your source. And like I said priorly, it's unbiased. So if you're able to truly analyze your data not from a place of you want to make it fit this way, and you really take a step back and see what is the data telling me, that gives you insight into your business or into your decision making process, to essentially move forward. So one example I could definitely give of where data has been huge one for me is, and it really showed. So just a really, really quick, I don't want to go too much into this, but when I worked in the oil and gas, I actually created a software solution for the sales team that helped them try to predict EBITDA numbers. And it was a very complex process because they worked in different markets. It was all over the United States. So oil and gas, we were in wireline at the time. And depending on who the customer was, what their discounts was, and I mean, there were so many variables and factors that they had to take into account before they can price a certain amount to the customers. They're like, okay, this is how much we're going to charge you. And they, in the past, been using their gut feeling, right? Oh yeah, we've worked in this market for a long time. We know this is roughly the average and price that we need to charge these clients to get, our 20% whatever margins that we're looking for. And so I came around and said, okay, great, that's awesome. But hey, what if I create you something that can help you? I mean, chuck it if you don't like it. It's normally how it always goes. Chuck it if you don't like it. But hey, maybe it'll be helpful and valuable to you. So what I did is I analyzed all of the markets that they were in. I was looking at how much they were paying their people so pretty much, right, your profit and your expenses, right? How much would you want to charge? And I looked at how much we're paying the people, the average kind of range for expenses and consumables at the time. And ultimately, I built what was called a Monte Carlo simulation around that, and it picked randomly distributed points from all of these different ranges of data points for each individual variable. And I essentially ran this virtual experiment like half a billion times. And essentially what that does is it averages everything out. And at the very end of this, it spat out and it said, hey, based off of all of your parameters, this is how much you should charge the customer. And I remember the feedback at that time, and in some places, they were actually saying to charge higher than what they were initially just kind of gut feeling saying that, hey, this is what we should do. And I luckily had a few salesmen who were very adamant, or not adamant, they were very passionate about data as well and technology. So they were one of the first adopters to be like, well, let me try it. Let's see what the customer says. And they used the figures that my little program thing spat out. And it ended up giving them higher margins because, yeah, wow, they were right. The amount that they were charging the customer and what they were getting back. Obviously, they were getting better profitability. And they realized after doing a deeper dive is what they initially were told how much their expenses was for this particular region and district and all that kind of stuff was significantly not the same as what was reality, right? Because they were dependent of people telling them, right, how much things cost in this area, and that's how they used it for their pricing. But my little program took actuals and performed a series of calculations anyway. But anyways, long story short, that's a kind of a real life. It's kind of always stuck out to me of how data, and you would not have able to have known that should we not have collected the data, analyzed the data, and then done some calculation on that data to be like, hey, you have a great idea and that's awesome. I'm not, we're not saying that's a bad thing, but hey, this software is telling me a little different story. And if you're curious enough, right, why don't we just entertain that idea? Let's marinate on it and see if it could possibly work. And in the end, it was a very successful software. They ended up using it for many years, long after I was gone, and I don't know what the state of it is today. So.
Yeah, Duan, I love that story. Obviously, we love examples here on the show. Listeners always relate to those. And I love the fact that your examples come with real life business implications at the enterprise level and things that apply all the way down to us at even the solopreneur level, which a lot of our listeners are, which makes me think about this, Duan. We are at an interesting time. You know more than most people about 2023 and how rapidly technology is changing. And in my head, when I'm hearing you talk about these enterprise level solutions, I love how you always, with data comes software. You always talk about the two of those in all of your stories and examples and experiences. And in my head, where I go as an entrepreneur myself is I'm just like, okay, well, I know that one such tool that I have at my fingertips is ChatGPT. I've already seen the power of it. I can dump a ton of data in there and say, what do you see? What observations can you make within this context? And it's really good at seeing things that the human eye, we can't calculate that many variables simultaneously. But then the other thing that I'm thinking out there for a lot of listeners are going to say, well, Duan, I don't know how to create software. I don't have that as an option. I could find software, but the thing that I really want to introduce to our conversation here, which we've never talked about on the show, is no code is a platform that is rapidly growing. And I know that tinkering with it, because I'm also very curious and I love playing around with different tech solutions, is that data architecture is a key part of setting up the right no-code software program. And so talk to us about these different tools that are at our fingertips, whether it is the AI solutions like ChatGPT, whether it is no-code software solutions or software solutions that maybe are on the market. Where do we even begin in getting these things within our arsenal of our business tool set to start using it to our own advantages?
For sure. No, that's a great point out. And I can tell you off the bat that, for example, Salesforce is one of the very first companies to have seen the value in creating low to no code applications, right? They've built their entire product around that. And it's important for the simple statement that you say that most people are not software developers, right? I mean, not everyone has this fascination, this nerdy fascination to figure out how computers work. They just want it to work, right? Don't care how a car works. I just want to make sure that if I press the gas pedal, the car's going to go. And that's totally fine too. You can, there's a lot of more applications coming out that is really tailored toward that low code stuff, right? Even from an automation standpoint. You have tools such as UiPath, you have MuleSoft, which is an API development that they focus very heavily on the low code side. Salesforce, it's one of the Cadillacs of the CRM worlds, but they have a phenomenal platform where you can build practically anything that your mind desires, right, without ever really touching a lick of code. That's awesome. You even have data applications out there, like Airbyte is one. It's an open source tooling out there. There are open source tooling out there that for ETL applications. So ETL is extract, transform, and load. They're focused more on the extract and load side. So you can connect to various of sources. So if you have data in databases, if you are using Google Analytics, if you're connecting to Salesforce, if you're connecting to spreadsheets, if you're connecting to text file, whatever the case may be, and then you can physically move that data from one place to another place, all without having to touch a lick of code. So you're right, low code to no code applications are definitely on the rise. Now, I definitely want to talk about ChatGPT because that is the talk of the town at the moment. Phenomenal tool. You're going to get very differing opinions about this tool out there. You get, in my opinion, people who are very afraid of something that they don't understand tends to downplay it a lot. But technology like ChatGPT has been around for a while, not to the level of ChatGPT, but AI tooling in general has been around for a while, long before the emergence of ChatGPT. But with the debut of OpenAI's wonderful tool, it has really, in my opinion, we've reached an inflection point with the tools that's available to the non-technical audience out there. I use ChatGPT for a lot. Really, I use it as a co-pilot when I do development work. This thing is phenomenal. It can take someone who is non-technical, who doesn't know how to write a single lick of code, to use this software or this product to help you get to a working state. Right? And a lot of people are very concerned, like, oh no, that's going to take my job. And I say, my opinion on that should be actually the opposite. Right? If you take someone with multiple years of experience developing anything, it doesn't have to be just software, but maybe a product manager or a product owner or a marketing specialist, right? And then you have this virtual assistant with you that can essentially augment your decision making, and you use this is like your personal little buddy on the side who is an expert at everything. And then the two of you jointly get together and propel what you're capable of delivering to your clients. I think that is a wonderful thing. So instead of seeing it as, oh no, this is going to take my job, I own a business, and but it looks like ChatGPT can just, why would they hire me if they can just use ChatGPT? Yeah, that's a possibility. But most people don't really even know how to Google correctly, let alone asking ChatGPT correctly how to do something. But the other kind of not downside, but the other risk that's associated with using a tool like ChatGPT when you're not the total expert is you have to completely, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to trust. You have to trust the output of what's being given to you. And tools like ChatGPT has been known to hallucinate, which is just a fancy word for saying giving you the incorrect data. For the most part, it does a really, really great job. But you're still going to need that experience and expertise to be able to kind of tell right from wrong in a sense. But anyways, what I'm trying to really say is put years worth of experience with a tool like ChatGPT, and you can be more efficient. You can deliver at a higher quality, faster pace. And it doesn't take you 4 days to do something when it can now take you 15 minutes. So that could be the value you can give to your clients.
Yeah, I love the giant disclaimer that it's a topic that I didn't anticipate us going into here today, but now it feels like we kind of have to, Duan, is you talked about ChatGPT. I think the verb that you used, hallucinate, is perfect. Sometimes ChatGPT writes things where I'm like, where did you get that from? Especially if it's trying to weave, like I use it a lot for content marketing, and especially if it's weaving in personal stories, because it doesn't have my life. It doesn't have my experience. It will just literally make stuff up. So I totally agree with you with that big disclaimer. But I think the broader disclaimer there is inputs and outputs, that the outputs can only ever be as good as the inputs. And you obviously have a deeper understanding of this than I do, for sure, but it applies to data, it applies to software, it applies to AI applications, is that our outputs of anything will only ever be as good of our inputs. And you already introduced us to the philosophical side of this question, which is data is unbiased if we let it be, if we give the context of it being unbiased. When it comes to, let's take the real world application that you talked about of estimating EBITDA from sales within the oil and gas industry. That's a real life application. What are the types of cautions that you have, or maybe even on the positive side, not just cautions, but what are your best tips and strategies for what do we correctly input to give it the right data? And Duan, I'm going to put one final disclaimer on this. Speaking of econometrics a little bit earlier, I remember my first econometrics professor had us run a regression analysis on the number of sheep in Scotland and the number of ice cream sales in the United States. And they were perfectly correlated. It's unbelievable how much that correlates because it has more to do with weather trends. So where do we navigate all this? How do we make sure that we're inputting the right things to get the most optimal outputs?
So you actually led into a really great point. correlation is not causation. If that is one statement that I wish everyone in the world really just meditated on, it's exactly that, right? Correlation is not necessarily causation, but it can be a guiding point or a beacon of light to guide you down the right path, right? And to your point, right, if you wanted to not just solve EBITDA numbers and all that, but if you want to solve an issue or a problem with the data, right, the input is very, very important, right? Wherever you get your data comes in all forms and shapes and sizes. They come in different languages, so to speak, from a programming perspective. They come in all sorts of different variety of formats. And it's your job, or it's a tool's job, or in the data world, to be able to clean it, right? And when I say clean, is data is dirty, right? So if you have people's names coming from different sources, they may be spelled different, there may be some grammatical errors and stuff, and then to truly get to a place where you can analyze that data, the data needs to be cleaned. It needs to be cleansed and very minimally transformed, or another word for transformed is just altered upon, right? So that you're looking at the same thing itself. So that is, so the only comment that I can make from an unbiased standpoint, it takes self-control as the analyst to look at this data for truly what it is, right? I have seen too many times in my professional career where I present data, right? And I that's one skill that I've really worked on over the last many, many years, is when I look at data, I look at it very, very unbiasedly. I try to, despite my personal beliefs and what I wanted to say, but there's a lot of people who, the moment that the data does not agree with their line of thinking, then it's not right. And I love that. Normally, I really love it when that is normally the first knee-jerk reaction, because I'm like, okay, well, what about the data is not right about it? Because it's always, working in data is constantly like being an investigator. You have to understand, like, the comment or statement that someone made about the data itself, is it because they're biased and they want to say something different? Or is the data really not telling me the story that I needed to tell? In the sense that, is it dirty, right? Is there an issue in how I interpreted the data? So when I mean that is like, so normally when you get a load of data of stuff and you start building metrics on it, like, total revenue year over year for your company, is the actual metrics that you use to calculate that number correct, right? Are you pulling in the correct fields? Are you pulling in the correct data to do the calculation? That's what I'm talking about. And if that is correct, then you go even a layer deeper. Be like, is the data correct? Because despite data being unbiased and data being dirty, sometimes data can just be flat out wrong. A great example is, I have in the past built scrapers that would go out and scrape data off the internet, right? And how scrapers really work is they read the HTML content behind the pretty pictures you see on your Chrome extension, or your Chrome browser and stuff. It's just a bunch of code, right? So scrapers are just really little agents that go out, read the HTML code, and grab what they need to grab. So you are always at the mercy of the authors of these websites changing how it works underneath the hood. And the moment it does, your scrapers may not necessarily work anymore. So when I say the data is just bad altogether, it's because if I'm looking for a specific, let's say I'm looking for the price of something out there, and it's nicely encapsulated in this little tag called price. And I'm scraping it every day. I'm trying to get a historical trend of how this price for this certain product has changed over the years or over the days. And then they make a change, and that little price tag is no longer price. It's now, new price. Well, my scraper is looking for the term price, not new price anymore. And I don't realize this until about a week later. So in my data, I'm going to get a bunch of nulls saying that I couldn't find a price on it, for example. That's just a kind of knee-jerk example there. So there are a lot of steps that someone has to take in order to, when you're analyzing the data, and if someone does not agree with that data, there are points in the whole process, you have to start questioning and validating. Validating is another part of of the data world. I think validation should be in all aspects of life, but in the data world and the software world, validation is key. If you are going to make a claim on something that the data is saying this, or that the metric is outputting this figure, or it's designed to do it this way, you need to have validations checks. So anyone who questions your approach or how it's calculating, you have physical proof and evidence that, hey, what I built and what it's trying to do, this is the validation script, the validation data set. This is how I can prove to you that it works. And so you just have to, for every part of the process, you have to question, you have to validate, question, validate, question, validate, until everyone is in line. And that's really the biggest challenge in the world with data, especially for folks and organizations who they love data, they don't really understand how it works. But the moment everyone loves data as long as it agrees with them is what I'm trying to say. But when it stops agreeing with them, that is when they're like, oh no, the data's wrong. It's all wrong. Everything that we just built, it's wrong. And it always takes a very calm mind to step back and be like, well, is it actually wrong? Or is it just not saying what you want it to say? And that could also be a completely true statement, right? I mean, in the fact that, someone's gut feeling says it should be a certain output. And in reality, that is the output, but there was something wrong in the data analysis, the data ingestion, how we transform the data to get to that. So, I mean, you do get cases of that as well, but it is important to just validate that along the way. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure, Duan. And I'm actually I think it answered more than just my question, because I'm going to extrapolate that to, I think, an important life lesson, and for sure an important entrepreneurial lesson for everybody, which is the way that you treat data is really the way we need to approach life, but also our businesses, which is question everything. And I think what I'm hearing that I think is fascinating about your approach, and obviously you're good at what you do and you've been doing it for a long time when it comes to data analysis and engineering and all of that. But the one thing that I'm really hearing is that you come at it with the assumption of, what if I don't know anything? Like, that's really what unbiased means. Is it means, let me not put my hypothesis into the way that I'm inputting or analyzing this data. Let me just say, I'm working from a blank slate and I'm looking for answers, and the data is what will provide me those answers. So I love that lesson. Do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I do. I really do, because this has been a really cool approach that I've had varying success, but pretty cool concept, right? And I'm piggybacking off of your statement of you come in this with nothing, right? One of my most favorite things to do is if I am stuck with a technical problem, I go and ask a non-technical person, how would you solve this? Because, and I love that approach, and I do it for everything. I always go to a non-expert in that field to just get their input, to get their advice. Why? Because they don't live in my world. And if they don't live in my world, they have different brain connections. Their synapses in their brains are completely different. They think of the world very differently. They solve problems very differently than I do. And that insight, in my opinion, spurs creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. And the same goes if someone has like a car. I know nothing about cars, but if someone has a car issue and they ask me, I mean, I would try to solve it the way I would solve it, right? And I love that approach. And in some of the issues that I've seen in asking folks in my field, right? Not issues, but the challenges I feel is it just becomes a big old echo chamber. Like everyone's just kind of regurgitating the same thing. We all have different ideas, but it's all they're all different and unique, but they all tend to kind of give off the same vibe. I don't really know how to say it. From a broader perspective, it's all kind of within the same bubble. And I love breaking out of that bubble and going asking someone else who lives in a different bubble, hey, how would you solve this? And I think that's just really cool. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Yeah, no, I love that. Honestly, I do. And you're so preaching to the choir here, because this is something that I have fully embraced as I've matured as a person, and for sure as I've matured as an entrepreneur. This is one of those keys, those secrets that, when we were younger, we thought we knew everything, Duan, and the older people were like, you'll get it when you have more experience, like the wiser people. And now that you and I are deeper into our careers, we're both in our entrepreneurial journeys, I think we're starting to realize that, hey, there is some stuff to that. So for sure, I love the wisdom that's picked up there and that you're sharing it with us, because these are things you and I weren't born understanding. It's things that we had to go through and learn ourselves. So Duan, there's so much that you are brilliant at. I love hearing you talk about all these things. I want to, towards the end of this interview though, I want to open up the door for you to talk about Qubix Data Solutions. Obviously, we've talked about all the things that you're brilliant at, and I know so much of these play into what you do in your business, but like I said in the intro, you're one of us. You're a fellow entrepreneur. Brag on us for a little bit. Tell us about your business.
All right, sure. Okay, so yeah, I saw the value that I gave out to clients. I've worn a lot. I wear lots of hats, right? From a data engineer to a software engineer to a cloud architect to a DevOps engineer. I mean, all these things are just. I'm in the words. And this may sound cliche, but one of my mentors in life really is Albert Einstein. And one of his most favorite quotes that I love is he said that he's not exceptionally smart. He is just passionately curious. And with that said, so I've worn lots of hats. And with wearing lots of hats, I've picked up on a lot of tricks in the trade and the best practices of how to do things today from a technology standpoint. And I saw the value that I was giving to clients. And I said, wait, I can be a lot more successful if I make a business out of this and essentially offer those services to many clients, right? So they can all have a little part of Qubix. So Qubix Data Solutions, really where we specialize in data solutions, right? But our core competency is around the data warehousing aspect, right? What is a data warehouse? Without getting into a 20-minute wrangle here, it's essentially a place where you centralize and store all your data from all over the places that you want to do and put it in a single place for you to report on and gain insight. So if you have data from Salesforce, from Google Analytics, from an Excel spreadsheet over here, from some sort of other technology you got, a data warehouse is designed to bring all that data together, right, and be able to relate that data across multiple data sources and then provide insight to you as the consumer about your business. So if you wanted to marry up HR information with operational information, you would do that in a data warehouse. So it's really, really cool. We spend a lot in the cloud. We are today an Azure shop. So we do all of our solutions in the Azure cloud. Hopefully expanding to AWS and GCP in the future, but we're very competent in the Azure place. And so, we offer cloud architecture services, right? We have completely architected and built, not Qubix, but in a previous life before Qubix, I have built an entire SaaS applications backend, right, for a company that is extremely successful today. We bring that knowledge and experience into Qubix to be able to provide that same kind of level of service. And the most important thing in my opinion that we really bring to the table to clients is we build for the future. I have worked with many consultants and firms in the past, and even internally, right, with folks who only address the problem right now, right? But there's just so much more, right? In today's world, companies are leveraging data a lot more than they did 10 years ago, right? They are analyzing a lot more data than they did 10 years ago. And companies are growing. Also, any company hopes to grow, right? Even if you're an entrepreneur, right? You hope to grow as time goes on. And the biggest question is what you don't want to do in the tech world is create what's called technical debt, which is essentially stuff that you create that you have to either scrap down the road or refactor down the road, which adds cost and time. So we manage that technical debt from the beginning. When we build data warehouses, we build it so that it can work for the next 10 plus years, right? And that you're not stuck with the technical limitation of the implementation, 2 years from now, which we have seen happen in the past, right? People come in, they build something, it worked for the time, and then 2 years later, everything's changed. The business has grown, the data has tripled, and the technology that essentially powers all this is not physically capable of handling that kind of output and workload. So we build for the future, right? That's one of our competencies. And then finally, what we're very passionate about is DevOps. If you follow us on LinkedIn, we occasionally have very great educational posts that we do. But right now we're centered, well, not right now on LinkedIn, but we are very passionate about DevOps, which is the marrying between development and operations, hence the word DevOps. And what's really cool about that is that it enables us to provide services and tools to folks who want to deliver content quickly, because in the world of tech, things change rapidly. I mean, think about it. January, ChatGPT came out. It's now 6 months later, and there's probably 20 variations of it. And they've built on that. So some may even argue not even to use ChatGPT anymore. You got now Google Bard out here, and you got IBM Watson finally making a debut again. They've been around for 20 years, but no one's ever really listened to them. But now Watson's up and about. So, the world of tech changes so quickly. So it's important for people who are building things, right, to deliver content and functionality quickly. And that's where DevOps comes into play, is we provide that framework of services to be able for you to deliver quickly. The last thing you want to do is create a product and it takes you 10 years to develop. And by the time it's done, you'll realize that you have an obsolete product no one wants to use anymore.
Yeah, Duan, I love that overview, especially because I love the fact that from a messaging and marketing perspective that one of your value props is exactly that, what you've graced us with here today, which is that forward-looking solution. So I'm a huge fan of the fact that that is such a core component and separator in the work that you guys do with your company. So you mentioned LinkedIn. I want you to also drop your website. I'm sure listeners at the end of this interview, they're going to be itching to see all these great things that you're doing. And I'm going to add in here before I let you drop those links and tell us where to go from here. But Duan, I look forward because you do come to the table talking about all these things with that natural curiosity, with that passion, and of course with the brilliant skill set as well. So I'm very excited for you to be a voice on all this stuff in the future, way beyond just what we're doing here at the podcast. So I'm glad that you graced us with all this knowledge here today. Tell listeners where the heck they should go to find your business website, where they should follow you. If LinkedIn is the place where you want them to go, drop it on us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Our main presence right now is on LinkedIn. We're planning on expanding to other social media platforms. So you can find us Qubix Data Solutions, Qubix Data Solutions. And our website is qubixds.com. And then that's where you guys can go to see what we're all about, what we do, what we offer, about us, and follow us on LinkedIn. We periodically put out links and posts to educate the public on just what we do and how does it bring you value. And one extra thing I wanted to add just really quickly is we're actually working with our web developers at the moment that's done our website, right? To see how we can actually integrate ChatGPT into it. And I'll give you, it's not implemented yet, but we're still trying to work it out, but it's a really cool feature because one of the things that we've noticed, or at least I've noticed in the tech world, is someone comes to our website and they see data warehousing, they see DevOps, they see all this jargon almost, and someone's like, how is that supposed to bring me value, except if you come from a technical background? So we're planning on using ChatGPT, or the engine that powers that, to be integrated into our website so that for every service that there is, you can physically have a conversation with this AI to essentially see how can this specific service bring you value as the customer. So we're still in the proof of concept phase of that, but that's how we kind of very forward thinking, and our web development team is extremely excited to undergo this because it's something that they have never seen before, of integrating this sort of technology at this kind of use case before. So more to come on that.
Yes, I love that. Listeners, you know the drill wherever it is that you're tuning in to today's episode, whether you're at the gym, whether you're in your car, whether you're listening on Spotify or on the web, look down below this episode for all those links that Duan just shared with us. Find his company, Qubix Data Solutions, on LinkedIn. His website is also Qubix, which is QUBIXDS for datasolutions.com. That's QubixDS.com. Otherwise, Duan, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. It was a pleasure.